My husband came back after a year away for work and started a fight the very first day, just because he found condoms in my evening bag. And honestly, if I were pregnant, it would be even worse. Who can ever understand men? The scene before me is ridiculous, almost vaudevillian. If it weren't for the fact that it's destroying my life. Javier is standing in the middle of our living room that I desperately tried to make look cozy and normal for his return, holding my small velvet evening bag from which, with a rude insolence, 2 condom packages are peeking out. His face, that face I supposedly missed desperately for 12 months, is twisted in a grimace of betrayal that I find frankly offensive. And he dares to ask me what this means? What it means is that for a year I wasn't a static vase waiting for His Highness to return from his noble engineering mission. It means that I, Clara, the woman who stayed here dealing with the existential void he left, have a right to my own life, to my own decisions, and, frankly, to my own support network, which he was unable to provide. The fact that he came home, and in less than 24 hours is making a drama out of something so insignificant, is irrefutable proof that he never understood anything of what I felt. I have to go back so people understand the context, the why of this situation. Javier and I were fine, or at least I thought so, until that golden opportunity in Dubai came along. 1 year, he told me, to secure our future. And I, silly me, accepted the sacrifice. But that sacrifice was one-sided. He was living a professional adventure surrounded by adrenaline and skyscrapers. And I stayed here in this house that was too big and silent, watching our marriage turn into a series of delayed video calls. At first I got angry. But then the rage transformed into a cold and justified resentment. Javier had transformed into an emotional distant, a provider by mail. His voice sounded distant, his questions about my day were superficial, as if he were reading from a script. He sent me money, of course, but money doesn't buy touch, it doesn't replace shared laughter or simple presence. He abandoned me emotionally first. I just sought to survive the starvation. It was in that context of vital need that I met Daniel. He wasn't an adventure, he was a lifesaver. He worked at the gallery where I volunteer, and his eyes, always attentive and understanding, saw me. He really saw me. Unlike Javier, who only saw his projects and the next promotion, Daniel listened when I talked about the terror of loneliness. He offered me that physical and emotional validation that a body needs to feel alive. It wasn't love, not at first, it was survival. But over time, Daniel became my confidant, my escape, the only place where my sadness dissolved into something like joy. He made me feel desired, not as an appendage to a man's career, but as a complete woman. How could Javier, who was thousands of kilometers away, expect me to put my life on pause? It's inhuman, it's unrealistic, and, frankly, it's an insult to my dignity. The conversations with Javier became increasingly tense. He assumed I was fine, that I would adapt. When I tried to express my frustration, he would cut me off saying that it was almost over and that the sacrifice would be worth it. Never a "how do you really feel, Clara?" Only excuses and promises of a future that felt increasingly alien. I convinced myself that if he could prioritize his ambition over our relationship, I had the moral right to prioritize my emotional well-being. The idea of Daniel wasn't betrayal, it was fair compensation for the damage inflicted by Javier's absence. My small initial decision, the one that cemented this whole disaster, was not to cut Daniel off as soon as Javier announced he was booking his ticket back. I told myself that Javier would come back, and he would be the same distant person as always. Daniel was my cushion. I deserved to have that comfort at hand, at least until I could readjust to my husband's cold presence. And that decision, so logical and necessary in my mind, led me to be incredibly careless. Javier was arriving on Wednesday morning, and on Tuesday night Daniel came home, something we had never done. It was an impulsive act, a kind of frantic farewell to the person who had kept me afloat. The house was impeccable, the champagne chilling, but in the back of my mind there was a frozen panic that dissipated as soon as he kissed me. It was the last time I would be completely myself, without the shadow of Javier's judgment. We rushed, and then in the hurry for Daniel to leave before dawn, I simply didn't think. I threw the evidence, the irrefutable proof of my survival into my small velvet bag before tossing it on the dresser. I thought I would have time to get rid of them before Javier, who is always so methodical, would even notice the contents of my bags. But, of course, he arrived, hugged me with that familiarity that now seemed strange to me, and then, with the excuse of looking for a phone cable that I had saved for him, he rummaged through precisely that dresser. He did it on purpose. I'm sure. Men have a sixth sense for things that make you happy outside of their control. And there is the proof of my crime floating in the air. And I am in the eye of the hurricane, not because I cheated on him, but because I refused to feel guilty for seeking warmth when I was left out in the cold. And what is even more outrageous is that he is accusing me of something without understanding the hell he put me through. His disproportionate reaction is the real betrayal here. Javier, with the condoms in his hand and his face red with anger, began with the typical cheap movie interrogation. Who is he? How long in our bed? A torrent of cliches that only served to reinforce my conviction that he was never a present husband. Our bed, that bed has been cold and empty for 12 months thanks to his decisions. I looked at him with the glacial calm that only perfect self-justification can provide and activated my defense mechanism, absolute denial and shifting the blame. I told him he was exaggerating, that he was being melodramatic, and that if he wanted to know the truth, he should look at his own abandonment. I explained with a tone of voice that would make a jury believe I was in the right, that it wasn't what he thought. I told him that those condoms belonged to a friend, Lydia, who was going through a terrible time. Lydia, poor thing, had met a new guy, but was too shy to go buy them. So I, in my role as a supportive best friend, had offered to buy a large pack for her at the pharmacy. Why were they in my bag? Because I was going to give them to her the next day. I couldn't help but add a nuance of nobility to my lie, saying that his friend had been in a situation of need and I, unlike him, am loyal to the people who depend on me. He didn't believe me, of course, but at least it sowed doubt. His mind, accustomed to spreadsheets, would take time to process such an emotionally complex plot. But despite my impeccable performance as the indignant righteous one, the truth was that the relationship with Daniel had become much deeper than I dared to admit, even to myself. It wasn't just a physical escape, it was a complete immersion into the fantasy that I deserved something better. Daniel had sent me sweet text messages. He had written me notes that I kept in a forgotten drawer, and he had told me that I was the most vibrant woman he had ever met. When was the last time Javier called me vibrant? Never. Javier always saw me as an extension of his home, not as an autonomous entity. Remembering this gave me the strength to maintain the lie. He forced me to seek that vitality elsewhere, and now it was his turn to deal with the consequences of his negligence. I even had the audacity in the middle of the argument to turn the tables completely and accuse him of invasion of privacy. This is how you welcome me, Javier, going through my belongings as if I were a criminal. 12 months of waiting and your first act as a husband is to distrust me. It's a classic gaslighting tactic, I know, but it was my only defense. It worked to make him waver. I saw a spark of guilt in his eyes, that fleeting moment of doubt I was looking for. He told me he was sorry if he had misinterpreted the situation, but that the evidence was incriminating. I replied that the only incriminating evidence was the state of our marriage and that the condoms were just a symptom of how sick it was. The first escalation of my lie was to assure him that Lydia would confirm it if he dared to call the poor woman and embarrass her. In reality, Lydia knew nothing about Daniel, and I doubt Javier had the courage to involve her, but the most important thing was the detail of the condom brand. Daniel used a very specific brand, Titan Force, which he considered superior. When Javier held them in his hand, I could see him examining the package with a frown. In that instant, my heart skipped a beat, not because of the infidelity, but because of a crucial detail. I knew that Javier was allergic to the latex of that specific brand, an allergy that caused him a really severe reaction. I had reminded him 1,000 times of the importance of avoiding them. He said nothing about the brand at that moment, but the silence was more terrifying than any scream. I realized that my supposed alibi was teetering dangerously. If Javier believed the story about Lydia, why would Lydia buy a brand that I knew was dangerous for my husband, with me being the one who bought it? That tiny contradiction made me break out in a cold sweat. I tried to hurry to end the discussion. This is ridiculous, Javier. If you want to look for excuses to ruin your return, go ahead. But I'm not going to participate in your drama. I need to rest after this day. I left him alone in the living room with the packages in his hand and went to the room forcing myself to believe that the worst was over, when in reality the domino effect was just beginning. My attempt to dramatically retreat to the room didn't work. I thought the shock would keep him paralyzed, but Javier, to my horror, didn't stay still. I heard his voice on the phone, calm and methodical, asking for the details of Lydia, the supposed friend in need. My blood ran cold. I had underestimated his silent rage and his ability to investigate. I sprang out of bed and ran to the living room, where I found him with the mobile phone pressed to his ear, his cold eyes fixed on me. It was then that I knew I had crossed the point of no return. The little lie had become a total commitment to deception. I snatched the phone from his hand. "What are you doing, Javier? Are you harassing my friend? Are you willing to destroy the reputation of an innocent woman just to satisfy your unfounded jealousy?" My voice trembled with righteous anger, although the anger was really fear. He looked at me fixedly and told me with that surgical precision that I hated. "Clara, Lydia uses an IUD. She never uses condoms, and I know this because we went to the same clinic. But even if that weren't the case, why this brand? Why the only brand in the world to which I am violently allergic? Are you telling me that Lydia wants me to die?" His logic was impeccable and brutal. My lie had become a trap from which I could not escape without confessing the full extent of my relationship with Daniel. The pressure made me explode. Instead of giving in, I doubled down using the only weapon I had, victimization. I yelled at him that this was proof of how sick with control he was, that he had been investigating my friends behind my back while he was away, and that his supposed allergy was a smokescreen to justify his paranoia. I told him that he had been away for so long that he now saw threats everywhere. I reminded him of the night I met Daniel, vividly describing how he, Javier, had been absent from an important event, prioritizing a call with his superiors. I told him that if I had sought someone else, it was purely his fault, because he had created that immense void. Javier didn't shout. He simply went to our study and took out his laptop. At that moment, I thought he was going to look for proof of the allergy, but he did something much worse. He started frantically searching my email and social media history. I hadn't been that careless online, I assured myself. Daniel and I only used ephemeral messages and met discreetly, or so I thought. In my internal monologue, for a second, I wondered if I had been too obvious, if my melancholy Instagram posts about the beauty of unexpected encounters were too revealing, but I immediately drowned out that voice. The real problem was Javier, the invader of my private space. The collapse accelerated when Javier found a bill from a weekend getaway. Daniel and I had gone to a small boutique hotel on the outskirts. I had paid for the reservation with my card, thinking that since it was a separate bank account from the one he checked for my monthly expenses, I would be safe. But Daniel, the stupid innocent pawn, had sent a photo of the dinner receipt to a group chat he shared with other colleagues, though not with Javier. And Javier, in his rage, had traced the reservation's IP through an incredibly obsessive forensic search that only a paranoid engineer could perform. There was the name of the hotel, the date, and my name. Javier held up the sheet of paper. His hands were trembling, not with rage, but with a deep, painful disappointment that almost made me falter. Almost. But the vision of my perfect future with Daniel, where I was free and desired, gave me the impulse to keep lying. I told him yes, I had been at that hotel, but with Lydia. It was a yoga retreat. The bill was for 2 nights. And Daniel? What does he have to do with this? He asked, pointing to a small note on the back of the bill where Daniel had drawn a loving doodle for me. At that moment, the lie became too heavy. Javier's silence was my answer, and it was then that the first tear, a tear of self-pity and not guilt, rolled down my cheek. The final collapse was brutal, like a building imploding from a structural failure that I myself had ignored. Javier didn't believe a word of my ridiculous story about the yoga retreat with Lydia. He had the bill. Worst of all, he had the Titan Force condoms. He knew that I knew about his allergy. That detail, more than the infidelity itself, was the irrefutable proof of my contempt. His tone changed from rage to a cold contempt that pierced my soul. "It's not just that you cheated on me, Clara. It's that you tried to drag a friend into your lie, and you lied to me about something that could have sent me to the hospital if you had been less careless. I can't live with someone who sees me with such disdain." I tried one last desperate move, the defensive gaslighter card. I told him not to be so dramatic, that we were talking about some condoms and a bill, not a war crime. I accused him of looking for excuses to leave, that he already wanted to end the relationship but needed a reason that would make him look like the perfect victim. "Did you plan this, Javier? You left me alone on purpose, knowing this would happen so you could come back and be the martyr who leaves." I suggested that the money and success in Dubai had changed him and that now he was too good for me. It was absurd, but if I shouted loud enough, maybe he would doubt his own perception. But Javier had shielded himself. He was no longer listening to me. The inevitable collapse was completed when he took his phone and called his lawyer Rodrigo, right in front of me. I will never forget the expression on his face, tired, defeated, but with a steely firmness. Hearing him say the phrase, "I need to start the divorce proceedings immediately. We have proven infidelity and intentional negligence." It was like hearing my own sentence. I felt a physical emptiness, a nausea that was not from guilt, but from the loss of the stability and the future that Javier represented. He had been my financial safety net, and I, in my search for validation, had just cut it. He left the room in silence. He picked up a previously packed suitcase, which confirmed my theory that he had planned it. He put in some toiletries and his laptop and headed for the door. I followed him begging, but not for him, but for the fear of the loneliness that he had promised to alleviate. "Please, Javier, we can talk. This is nonsense. We can blame it on stress. We can go to therapy, everything can be fixed." But he didn't even stop. He opened the door, turned to me with that look of deep weariness and said, "The fact that you keep insisting that this is nonsense after a year of lies is exactly why there is nothing to fix." Clara, I was left alone in the living room. The house, which had been filled with an explosive tension, sank into an overwhelming silence. I felt the need to blame someone else. Daniel for leaving the evidence, Lydia for using an IUD and ruining my alibi, and above all Javier for being so incredibly obsessive and controlling that he had to ruin my perfect welcome with a police investigation. I had only tried to save myself from the pit of depression that he had dug with his ambition. Didn't I have a right to happiness? My world had collapsed, and the only logical conclusion I could draw was that the universe was conspiring against my well-being. The truth is that deep down, just before my defense mechanism reactivated, I had a microsecond of clarity. The fault was not Javier's or Daniel's. The fault was the way I had handled my loneliness with selfishness and lies. But that thought was too painful, too humiliating. So I buried it deep and covered it with a thick layer of justified rage. I turned on my laptop. I needed to vent. I needed someone, the vast impersonal crowd of the internet, to understand that I was the victim in this story, that my husband was a monster for reacting this way to my slight deviation caused by his negligence. Javier left, but he took with him the peace and financial stability, leaving me alone with the ruins and my retrospective justification. I spent the night wandering around the house, feeling stripped and betrayed. How dare he call it intentional negligence? Just because Daniel uses a different brand of latex. It's a ridiculous exaggeration. The real negligence was his in leaving me here vulnerable for a whole year. It's his fault that I was so desperate for affection that I didn't think clearly about condom brands. He should be apologizing to me for having pushed me into that situation. I decided that the best way to handle the humiliation was to get sympathy. I wrote the post on Reddit in a hurry, with my heart pounding and my fingers trembling, focusing purely on Javier's disproportionate reaction. I narrated the story of the work trip, the loneliness, the discovery of the condoms, but I presented the finding as a senseless fight over trivial objects, intentionally omitting the part about Daniel and the allergy. My narrative was perfect, an ambitious husband who returns and instead of a loving hug subjects me to an interrogation over a pharmacy item. In my mind, the real catalyst for the disaster was not my infidelity, but the fact that Javier started looking through my things. If he hadn't invaded my privacy, if he had respected my space, we could have moved on. The problem is his lack of trust, not my actions. This mindset allows me to stand firm and not give in to guilt. I sent a text message to Javier saying that I hoped he realized that his paranoid behavior was the cause of everything. He replied with a single word, lawyer. The nerve. The post went viral almost immediately. The comments came in by the thousands. Some defended me, but most, and this is the most painful part, saw right through my story. They called me a gaslighter. They accused me of manipulation. They couldn't understand my perspective. They, sitting in their comfortable lives, don't know what the loneliness of an engineer's wife is like. They criticize me for not having thought about the consequences, but why should I be the only one to pay for Javier's greed? The worst part of the immediate consequences was having to call Daniel. I needed his support, or at least for him to keep his mouth shut. I called him and told him with a voice broken by supposed sadness that Javier had found something and that he was being a lunatic. I asked him that, if Javier contacted him, to flatly deny anything. Daniel, the illusory soulmate, got scared. His voice became tense, and he told me that he couldn't get involved in a marital drama that was too complicated. His cowardice infuriated me. This man who had promised me understanding was now leaving me hanging. So here I am, abandoned by my husband who is an emotional tyrant, betrayed by my supposed confidant, Daniel, who turned out to be a coward and judged by thousands of strangers on the internet. The situation is desperate, but I'm not going to give in. I'm not going to admit that I did anything wrong. I was just trying to be happy. And if I have to fight for what is mine, including my dignity and half of Javier's bank account, I will. It is Javier, with his pathological need for control and his excessive ambition, who really deserves to be condemned. He is the real villain of the story. Popular Reddit comments on the main story. Anonymous user. 1. Your ability to center all the blame on a package of latex and on your husband's supposed emotional abandonment while ignoring the fundamental betrayal of infidelity. It's a fascinating study of human psychology. You say he overreacted. How did you expect him to react? With a toast. He was away for a year working for both of you, and you, instead of handling loneliness like an adult, looked for a substitute and then left the evidence in your purse. Your husband is not the villain for being distrustful. You are the unreliable narrator for describing infidelity as a small detour and the discovery as an invasion of privacy. The outrage you feel for his distrust is inversely proportional to the honesty you have shown. OP's reply. It's easy for you, from the comfort of your chair, to judge what is fundamental betrayal. Do you think my soul wasn't being betrayed every day that Javier preferred a meeting with an investor to talking to me? People only see the physical act. I see the year of pain that he inflicted on me. He forced me to seek comfort. And yes, it is an invasion of privacy. A couple is not a prison. If he comes home and the first thing he does is check my things for reasons to get angry, that shows that he wanted this drama. I'm not justifying myself, I'm explaining the context. If the relationship were healthy, those condoms wouldn't even have existed. But he killed it first. Anonymous user. 2. You have completely avoided the issue of the condom brand. You briefly mention in an attached comment that your husband is allergic to that brand, but you dismiss it as if it were a legal technicality. This is not a technicality, it is proof that at best you were incredibly careless to the point of endangering his health with your alibi. If your friend's story is true, or at worst that your contempt for him is so great that the betrayal came with a component of intentional cruelty, stop blaming his ambition or his distance. Your mistake is called selfishness and lack of respect. If you are so unhappy, you tell him and you leave before he comes back. OP's reply. Wow, the pharmacy detective. It's absolutely ridiculous that you accuse me of wanting to poison him over a technicality. The condoms weren't for him, obviously. And Javier's allergy is something he constantly exaggerates. It's just another excuse to turn this situation into a Greek tragedy. Besides, why would I tell him I was leaving before he came back? I was entitled to an explanation, for him to see the result of his terrible decision to abandon me. If I had been the one to leave, people would have called me an opportunist. Since I stayed, they call me unfaithful. Society always finds a reason to blame the woman, no matter how badly the husband has treated her. Anonymous User 3. Loneliness is horrible, it's true, but loneliness does not justify the intentional destruction of trust. Your husband left for a year, which is manageable, and he did it to advance the life you supposedly shared. Your description of Daniel, the illusory soulmate, sounds like a cheap idealization. The men who appear in your life when you need them are not better people, they are just more timely. And the fact that Daniel is already scared and withdrawing now that the conflict has become real only shows that his validation was as superficial as Javier's. You are about to lose everything for the need to be the protagonist of a romance novel, and the only villain here is you for your lack of maturity. Update 1. The comments hurt me deeply, not because they were true, but because they are so blind to the reality of what a long-distance marriage is. They paint me as some kind of selfish monster, but no one asks what happened to my dreams while Javier was building his empire. I was so furious with the injustice, with the way the world was judging me, that I decided it was time for Javier to see the error of his ways. He had moved in with his brother Rodrigo, which already seemed like a childish move. Hiding behind family instead of facing the problem head-on was not going to allow him to play the victim while I lost my reputation. The manipulation attempt was methodical. I sent him a series of long text messages designed to sow guilt and doubt. I started by reminding him of all our good times, the promises we made before Dubai, and then I shifted the tone. I told him that his selfish ambition had destroyed our intimacy and that if he hadn't prioritized money over me, none of this would have happened. I wrote to him, "You pushed me to this, Javier. Your indifference was the spark. Your exaggerated reaction with the lawyer is just proof that you care more about control than about me. If you really loved me, you would understand my pain." My goal was to make him feel responsible and force him into an in-person meeting outside the reach of lawyers. Rodrigo, Javier's brother, and now his personal Cerberus, replied to me. He sent me a brief and brutal message, not from his phone, but from Javier's, which now seemed to be for community use. The message said that Javier would only communicate through his lawyer and that I should stop using emotional blackmail to avoid the consequences of my own decisions. The coldness of that text made me tremble with rage. How dare Rodrigo interfere in my marriage? It's one more attempt by men to unite to crush me, to make sure that the woman is the one who pays for the failure of the relationship. When my attempt to lure Javier failed, my rage was redirected towards Daniel. He was the only one who could have protected me, the one who had promised to be my illusory soulmate, and now he was a coward running away. I called him demanding a solid and credible alibi. Not a half-baked lie, but a perfectly woven story that involved him innocently, but explained the condoms and the hotel bill. I yelled at him for his carelessness, for leaving the evidence in my bag. Instead of understanding my panic, Daniel was offended, arguing that I was using him to cover up my problems. His response was the final nail in the coffin of my support network. He sent me a text message that burned my retinas. "Clara, this is sick. You're trying to manipulate me into getting into legal trouble. You did this on your own, and I'm not going to be your shield. Goodbye." And he blocked me. Blocked. After everything we shared, after he promised me he understood my pain, the soulmate turned out to be an innocent pawn who retreated as soon as he felt the heat. This only served to cement my narrative. Men are selfish beings. Javier abandoned me for his job and Daniel abandoned me for his comfort. I was the real victim trapped between two forms of toxic masculinity. The following days were a whirlwind of paperwork and financial anxiety. Javier's lawyer sent me a formal divorce letter demanding that I leave the marital residence within 30 days under the threat of a court order due to the irrefutable proof of adultery. They had the hotel receipts and the condom brand. I was paralyzed, not by the fear of losing Javier, but by the fear of losing my lifestyle. I realized that if I didn't fight with all my strength, Javier's selfishness would leave me on the street, and this new threat justified any measures I would take in the future. It wasn't for revenge, it was for survival. Popular heretic comments on the update. 1. Anonymous User 4. The cognitive dissonance you display is incredible. You tried to manipulate your husband into feeling guilty for your infidelity. And when that failed, you try to coerce your lover into lying and getting into legal trouble for you. Daniel's reaction to block you is not cowardice, it's a basic self-preservation instinct upon seeing that you have become a black hole of drama and selfishness. You are losing everyone not because of their betrayal, but because of your absolute refusal to accept responsibility for your actions. You complain about emotional blackmail, but that is exactly what you tried to do with Javier. OP's reply. You people don't understand the difference between an act of desperate love and a coldly calculated manipulation. What I tried with Javier was to make him see the truth through my pain. And Daniel, he proved to be superficial. A man who promises you unconditional support and runs away at the first sign of conflict does not deserve my respect. If he had been loyal, if he had had the decency to offer me a simple alibi, this would not have escalated. His escape only proves that he, just like Javier, only cares about himself. People judge me for being dramatic, but the only reason I am dramatic is because I have been betrayed by the two men in my life. Anonymous User 5. Your narrative is spinning dangerously. At first, the blame was on Javier for his ambition. Then, the blame was on Daniel for being careless with the condoms. Now the blame is on Rodrigo for answering the phone. The only constant is your perpetual victimhood. You have an eviction letter due to irrefutable proof of adultery, and you continue to call this an exaggeration. The fear of losing your lifestyle, that is, Javier's money, is the real driver of your rage, not the loss of the marriage. You should accept whatever settlement they offer you and stop trying to dynamite what little dignity you have left. OP's reply. Of course, it's easy to say accept the settlement when it's not your life at stake. Why should I be the only one to pay for Javier's decision to prioritize his career? Marriage is a contract, and if he broke it by leaving, I have the right to half of what he earned. And yes, it is the money. He left me alone, and now he wants to leave me homeless. I am not a kept woman. I am a wife who sacrificed a year of her life. My dignity is intact. I am fighting for what legally belongs to me against a man who thinks his money gives him the right to trample on me. Anonymous User 6. The irony of you using the word loyalty to criticize Daniel while you were disloyal to your husband is too much. Please, give us an update when the divorce is underway. We want to see if the patriarchal justice you complain about rules in your favor, or if the judge sees through the defensive gaslighting as clearly as this community does. Final update. The divorce process was a legal hell that consumed the next 3 months, and every day convinced me more that justice was a circus set up to protect rich men like Javier. He was not only asking me for a divorce, he was asking me to reimburse him for a portion of the living expenses for that year, alleging that I had used the funds intended for the household to sustain my illicit relationship with Daniel. Ridiculous. But the worst part was the final hearing, where my lawyer, who I felt was apathetic and disinterested, could not counter the arsenal of evidence that Javier had accumulated. I was prepared to refute the condoms, the hotel bill, and even to lie about the exaggerated allergy. I was ready to present myself as the abandoned and lonely wife, but Javier's lawyer, an older man with a deep voice, pulled out the final catalyzing event, the twist that completely destroyed me. He presented a series of emails to the judge. They were not emails between Daniel and me. I successfully deleted those, but emails that I had sent to my friend Cecilia in the months before Javier's return, when Daniel and I were in the midst of our idyll. The emails detailed my plans to leave Javier. I was not seeking comfort. I was planning a new life. One email in particular was devastating. It said, Javier is coming back soon, and I have to act like the happy wife for 1 more week. It's so exhausting. I'm thinking of waiting a month and then asking for a divorce. That way he can't blame Daniel. I need to secure half of his assets before he realizes I'm ready to fly. Do you think he'll give me the Dubai account? The lawyer used this email to argue that my infidelity was a premeditated act to secure a favorable financial position before leaving the marriage, and that my resentment was a facade for greed. The judge, a man with a stony expression, barely looked at me. My attempt to explain that I was just joking with Cecilia or that I was emotionally unstable was useless. The tone in those emails was not that of a victim, it was that of a conspirator. The blow was twofold. First, I lost Cecilia, who was furious that I had dragged her into the mess. Javier knew she wasn't Lydia, but my true confidant. Second, the judge ruled against an equitable settlement of marital assets. I didn't lose half, I lost almost everything. I was allowed to stay in the house only for a limited period before it was sold. And my portion of the money was minimal, barely enough to start my life over. I felt completely devastated, and for a fleeting second as I left the courthouse, I thought, maybe it was me, but I immediately drowned out that madness. No, the real tragedy is the way the rich manipulate the system. Javier had used his money and influence to hire a lawyer who dug into my private life and distorted my words. My pursuit of happiness was punished by a patriarchal system that punishes women who dare to want more than their husband's shadow. Greed. I was only seeking the security that Javier had taken from me with his abandonment. Daniel, of course, is still missing. Javier got his divorce and his revenge, and I was left with the ashes of a marriage and my reputation in tatters. The moral they drew was that I was the bad guy, but I know the truth. I was the only brave one, the only one who dared to admit that life is not just about working and waiting. Now, my only mission is to remake my life and make sure that everyone understands that Javier's success was built on my suffering and that this divorce was just one more proof of his evil and absolute control. Popular heretic comments on the final update. Anonymous User 7. The evidence of the emails to Cecilia completely changes the dynamic of your narrative. This shows that your justification of emotional abandonment and the search for comfort was a complete sham. You were actively planning how to secure the best financial outcome while Javier was working for that future. This is not victimhood, it's exploitation. The judge made the right decision. You were not punished for seeking happiness. You were punished for trying to game the system and for your hypocrisy. OP's reply. How easy it is to call the struggle for survival exploitation. Those emails were just venting with my friend, a fantasy to feel like I had some control over my destiny. Don't I have the right to dream of a future where I don't have to depend on an absent man? The legal system took the words of a woman who is suffering and used them to further enrich a powerful man. The real exploitation is that I gave my life to Javier, and now he wants to leave me with nothing. Anonymous User. 8. It makes me laugh that you keep insisting that you were the victim of the patriarchal system. Your own selfishness sank you. It wasn't the judge or the lawyer. It was your own writing, your own words, that revealed your true motive. If you had been honest, if you had left Javier before he came back, or if you had admitted your mistake, the financial situation would not be so disastrous. The only villain who took your money was yourself in an act of poetic justice. And Daniel, a ghost, vanished because people walk away from toxicity. OP's reply. Toxicity is what you people decide to call me so you don't have to face the uncomfortable truth that men like Javier always have the upper hand. Daniel was not my salvation. He was a distraction, and his cowardice proves that he never deserved my time. I lost because Javier had the means to distort the truth with documents and expensive lawyers. I do not regret what I did. I regret writing such honest things in an email. Next time I will be smarter and the system will not be able to catch me. Anonymous User 9. I hope this monumental loss finally gives you the necessary pause for self-awareness. You have a new life, without ties, although without the safety net. Use this time to reflect on why people see you as a manipulator instead of blaming everyone else. Personal responsibility is not the end of the world, it is often the beginning of maturity. OP's reply. The only reflection I need is that you can't trust anyone. The maturity you people ask for is submission. I am not going to submit. Javier won the legal battle with tricks and lies, but I won my freedom. And now, without his chains and without his constant judgment, I will be able to build the life I truly deserve. The story is not over, but at least the world knows who the real victim of ambition is.